developments.
So let's talk about Ukraine. This has been the area of intense cooperation between you. Richard, what is the victory plan in Ukraine? The approach sometimes looks to me to be that at some point, Western demonstration of resolve will make Putin give up. But is that sustainable? Is it even working inside Russia?
I think it's totally sustainable. It's absolutely critical that we do sustain our support to Ukraine. And it's really difficult. It's hard. And particularly in eastern Ukraine, this is attritional warfare where there is a huge amount of suffering on both sides. And Putin is pushing forward in a sort of attritional Pyrrhic campaign of taking village by village as he goes forward. When he takes those, there's nothing left. I mean, that's why I deliberately used the term Pyrrhic. There is nothing left because everything is utterly destroyed. But that is the Kremlin way of war. That's what they did in Grozny. It's what they did in Aleppo, and it's what they're now doing in East. So it is tough, but it's also important to remember that our Ukrainian friends have an absolute will to fight. And it's important to remember how this started. It started in this phase with Putin mounting a war of aggression in February 2022. And 2.5 years later, that failed. It continues to fail. The Ukrainians will continue to fight. We will continue to help them to fight. And it's difficult, there's no doubt at all. But a final comment, the move into Kursk, it's too early to say how long the Ukrainians will be able to hang on in there and how that.
Do you think that was a good idea, the move into Kursk?
Say it again, Ruda.
Was that a good idea?
I think it's typically audacious and bold on the part of the Ukrainians to try and change the game in a way. And I think they have, to a degree, changed the narrative around this. As we were saying, Putin pushing forward, grinding forward, village by village, and just having a sort of mentality that I'll just hang on to what I grab. I'm not interested in negotiations. I'll just gradually increase it. The Ukrainians, by going in and taking Kursk, have really brought the war home to ordinary Russians. They are now, he has gone into this war 2.5 years ago. Not only has he seen things like NATO get 2 more members, he's now lost a part of his own territory. So I think, we'll have to see how it develops, but I think it's bold and it clearly, we should be supporting our Ukrainian friends.
So, Bill, I wanted to just ask you to comment on something specific about Putin. You've written that the Ukraine war is quietly corroding Putin's power, but also that his grip doesn't seem likely to weaken anytime soon. So, which is it? Sometimes it seems to us that the Prigozhin rebellion was more of a time off, was more as a one-off.
I mean, I think what you've seen first, as Richard said, is the Kursk offensive is a significant tactical achievement. It's not only been a boost in Ukrainian morale, it has exposed some of the vulnerabilities of Putin's Russia and of his military. Much as Prigozhin's short-lived mutiny a little more than a year ago did as well, it did raise questions on the part of people we could see across the Russian elite about where is this all headed. And that underscores the point Richard made that, Putin's whole narrative right now is a very cocky, very smug one. It's time's on my side. It's only a matter of time before the Ukrainians are going to be ground down and all of their supporters in the West are going to be worn down, and I'll be able to dictate my terms for a settlement. And I think, what these events have done, the Kursk offensive most recently, is to put a dent in that narrative. And it does raise questions in the Russian elite about what is all this for. If you remember the video that Prigozhin released the Friday morning of his mutiny, was as scathing an indictment as I've seen from anyone about Putin's conduct of the war. He said, first, and this is someone who is very close to Putin and an intimate in this regime. He said 3 things. First, that there was no Ukrainian threat that prompted this war. That's all a lie. Second, he said, the military conduct of the war, Russian generalship, has been abysmal. And third, he said that corruption is the root of this political system. And that, we could see at the time, created some debate within the Russian elite. The Kursk offensive has prompted that too. Does that mean that Putin's on his last legs? No, I don't think either of us would.
Do you see his grip on power weakening?
I'll start. I don't see any evidence today that Putin's grip on power is weakening. He does one thing really well, and that's repress people at home.
Yeah, I would just don't ever confuse a tight grip with a stable grip. For somebody who's lost a chunk of his country, who has seen a mercenary group that he fostered march halfway up the road to Moscow, yes, absolutely, he's got a very tight grip, but that doesn't mean quite the same thing as being a stable.
So let's talk about a slight difference in the way that your two governments have approached the war. I'm going to take Storm Shadows, for example. The UK seemingly thinks that these long-range missiles should be used against targets inside Russia. The US seemingly doesn't, and it's always favored more of a sort of drip-drip approach to Ukraine military aid. I want to quote something that Lawrence Friedman said about escalation. He said, the Americans are caught in a trap of their own making, and they don't know how to get out of it. Now, Bill, you can tell us, perhaps, if you know something about Russian escalation that Richard doesn't know?
About Russian...
About escalation that I don't know.
No, listen.
Is there something you're not sharing with Richard about Russian escalation?
There's nothing I'm not sharing with Richard.
I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this difference.
Yeah. No, well, first, I would take issue a little bit with the comment that you cited. The United States has provided massive support for Ukraine throughout this war, and we will continue to. President Biden has been very clear about that. And that has enabled the Ukrainians to fight with such courage and tenacity. None of us should take lightly the risks of escalation. There was a moment in the fall of 2022 when I think there was a genuine risk of the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons. I have never thought, however, and this is the view of my agency, that we should be unnecessarily intimidated by that. Putin's a bully. He's going to continue to saber rattle from time to time. The president sent me to talk to one of our Russian counterparts, Sergei Naryshkin, at the end of 2022 to make very clear what the consequences of that kind of escalation would be. And we've continued to be very direct about that. So I don't think we can afford to be intimidated by that saber rattling or bullying. We got to be mindful of it, but I think the record shows that the United States has provided enormous support to Ukraine. I'm sure we'll continue to, and I'm sure the president will consider other ways in which we can be supportive in the months ahead.
It's really
Richard,
hard
to argue. Would you like the US to be less cautious?
It's really hard to argue with the plain facts of the amount of financial contribution and the amount of military material that has been provided by the Ukraine, and the lion's share is from the United States. So, and on my comment on the escalation thing is that there's only one party here who is talking about nuclear escalation, talking about nuclear stuff, and it is Putin, and it is deeply irresponsible and reckless. No one else is, and as Bill said, nobody in the West is going to be intimidated by such talk. Or any other behavior by the Russian state, because we all recognize we've got to stay in this, and we have to try and help the Ukrainians to restore their independence and sovereignty. So
there is another issue which I think you've been dealing with, both of you, and several agencies in Europe as well. As you wrote in today's FT, you're working to disrupt the reckless campaign of sabotage across Europe being waged by Russian intelligence. How are you doing that? Because many of these attacks seem to be carried out by proxy, so there's always deniability. How do you deter them?
Well, you do it by, I'll go first, Bill. I mean, you do it by really good, old-fashioned security and intelligence work. You do it by identifying the Russian intelligence officers behind it. You do it by identifying the criminal elements that they are using. The fact that they are using criminal elements shows you that they're becoming a bit desperate. They can't use their own people. They're having to do it through criminal elements. Criminals do stuff for cash. You know, they're not reliable, they're not particularly professional, and therefore, usually, we're able to roll them up pretty effectively. And that's
So it's become more amateurish in a way.
Sorry again?
It's become a bit more amateurish.
Well, it's not amateurish, it's just a bit more reckless. I mean, I think Russian intelligence services have gone a bit feral, frankly, in some of their behaviour. In the UK, this is not new. You know, those of us, we were all very well remember 2018 and Salisbury. And if you think about not just the attack, but the fact that those intelligence officers, in that case Russian military intelligence, left a large file of a deadly nerve agent, Novichok, lying around to be picked up. It could have killed an entire school. In fact, it killed an innocent British civilian. So I'm afraid it is rather emblematic of their approach to these things. And it's really important that some of the reckless end of this is dealt with. But we're on it, and we're working together. And it's a classic example of partnership, actually.
It is. And, amateurish can actually be more reckless and more dangerous as well. And so sharing intelligence with our allies and partners, not just between us, and then working together to disrupt a lot of those plots, I think, is the best way to deal with it, and that's what we're very effectively engaged in.
It is one way to deter stepping up your own sabotage operations, your own cyber operations. I mean, I don't expect you to give me details, but in general, as a general principle?
I'm glad you're not expecting us to go into detail. I mean, it's just, I'm struggling a bit really because where we use cyber as a tool in our business, of course, we are doing it to collect intelligence to disrupt terrorist groups. It's just of a different order to what I was just describing in my earlier answer.
Okay. There is one area of sabotage which I think we hear about, but we're never quite certain. So the head of the U.S. Army's Northern Command said recently that there are more Russian military intelligence agents in Mexico than in any foreign country. Is there any sign that Russia is facilitating illegal migration into the U.S. across the Mexican border? Is that something that
it's something we're very sharply focused on, along with our domestic, law enforcement counterparts as well. Part of this is a function of the fact that so many Russian intelligence officers have been kicked out of, Europe over the course of the 2.5 years after the war. So they're looking for places to go and looking for places in which they can operate. But we're very sharply focused on that.
I want to